Welcome to Thursdays at the Museum. I'm Ian Rapnicki. I'm a Community Engagement Manager with the DIA. Thanks for joining us for today's virtual program. But I want to remind viewers in Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb counties that general admission to the museum is always free for residents, and that does include access to two exhibitions that are on view right now. So very quickly, I want to highlight those. One is called Conscious Response. It's called Conscious Response Photographers Changing the Way We See. And it focuses on some recent acquisitions and gifts that the DIA has recently acquired that have never been on view. So you can see that in the museum through January 8th. The other current exhibition, free for Tri-County residents, and actually free with admission to the museum in general, is called Van Gogh's Artistic Roots, the Hague School and French Realism. You can see that through January 29th. So if you're able to get to the museum, be sure to check those out. But today's tour is called Child's Play, Children in Art at the DIA. And we'll be hearing all about that from volunteer docents Dave Galley and Deb Coombs, with assistance from Ray Henney, managing the slides, of course, very important. If you'd like to ask a question during today's program, you can do that by signing into YouTube and leaving a comment there. Or if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can leave a public comment there as well. And the questions will be fielded by DIA's Manager of Volunteer Development, Christine Mark. But now let's get started with Deb and Dave. Hi.
Hi, Ian. Thank you so much. Hi, Dave. How are you today?
Good.
Good.
Good. Thanks, Deb. Good, Ian.
Well, thanks, everybody, for joining us. Today, as Ian said, we're going to look at images of children and how artists portray them throughout the ages, whether they are happy, sad, sweet, shy, or highly competitive. Portraits of children are always compelling. As Ian mentioned, I'm joined by my good friend and fellow IPV docent, David Galley. So let's get started, Dave, with our first object. And this is a sculpture. It's called Horace the Child. This is a small statuette. It's from Egypt. It's made of bronze, and it's more than 2,500 years old. Although it's very small, at only 4 inches high, it represents one of the most important gods of ancient Egyptian mythology. So, who is Horus? Well, Horus was the son of Osiris and Isis, and together the three of them were worshipped as the Holy Family Triad of Egypt. Horus was one of the most important deities of ancient Egyptian civilization, and his name means he who is above. The story of Horus begins with his father, Osiris, the god of order who reigned on the earth. Osiris married his sister Isis, and their mission was to bring peace and prosperity to Egypt. But Osiris had a brother named Set, and Set was an evil god, a god of chaos. Set envied his brother Osiris, and he hated Isis. So he decided that he was going to murder him and take over the throne. Set gave a great feast in honor of Osiris and presented him with a beautiful chest of cedar that was inlaid with ebony and ivory. Then he challenged Osiris to lay down in the chest. When Osiris climbed in, Set nailed down the lid, weighed down the chest, tossed it in the Nile, and watched it disappear. Now, the beautiful chest became a coffin for the king. The death of Osiris threw the cosmos into a great chaos and made the gods weep. Isis, so greatly distraught, wandered throughout the land searching for her husband. The chest drifted down to sea and washed into Phoenicia, but Isis finally found it. She released Osiris's body from its coffin. Using her special powers, Isis took the form of a sparrowhawk. She fanned her husband's body with her wings, breathed life into him, and then gave birth to Horus. As a safeguard against Set, Isis fled into the marshland of the Nile and took the baby Horus with her. She found shelter on a little island where the goddess Buto lived and entrusted the child to her. As Horus grew up in the world, the spirit of Osiris visited him and taught him all that a great warrior should know so that he could take up battle against Set when he came of age. And so, for the next 80 years, Horus and Set were locked in a battle to claim the throne. Finally, with no winner, they asked a tribunal of the most powerful gods to judge whom the next pharaoh would be. They could not come up with a final verdict, and so the judges asked Osiris, who was the ruler of the underworld now, to intervene in their dilemma. Not surprisingly, Osiris said he'd send demons to the realm of the gods if his son were not made king. So Set was put in chains and conceded his claim to the throne. Horus became the pharaoh, the god of the sky, and the ruler of all gods on earth. He was worshipped as the hero who avenged his father's murder, and every pharaoh thereafter traced their lineage to him. Now you can see this bird. He's also depicted, Horus has been depicted in a variety of ways. Egyptians believed that many of their gods and goddesses were reincarnated as animals on earth. According to ancient mythology, Horus was the ruler of the sun and the sky, so he's often portrayed as a falcon, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. We have this statuette in our Egyptian galleries at the DIA, and it's on view there now. But another version of Horus depicts him as a falcon-headed man. He's wearing a red and a white crown, and that's regarded as the Egyptian symbol of kingship. But now, here we're talking about Horus the child. And statues of Horus seen as the child always show him as he looks here, as a young naked boy with a shaved head, a side lock of hair, and a finger on his lips. The lock of hair was considered as a divine attribute that designated Horus as the legitimate heir of Osiris. Subsequently, the braid called the lock of Horus, or side lock of youth, was worn by children of the pharaohs, not only to show them as children, but also to indicate their connection to the youthful Horus. Historians believe that Horus posed with a finger to his lips in silent fear of his uncle Set. The sufferings that Horus faced throughout his childhood became an inspiration for the people of Egypt, and Horus, in this form, became their god of silence, secrets, and confidentiality. Christine, are there any questions?
Not at this time, Deb, but Horus sure has a far-reaching effect over the history of Egyptian belief systems, doesn't he?
He certainly does. There's a wide spectrum of views of Horus that we have. You can see these two figures we saw, the falcon and this figure here. And if you go into the museum, you'll also see him on the wall, maybe, or in our book, pictured as a man with a falcon head. Yeah, he's very, very cool figure. Love him. So now, if there are no questions, I'm going to turn this over to Dave, and he's going to show us something very interesting. Dave.
Yeah, thanks so much, Deb. I love hearing stories about ancient Egypt. Those stories are always so fascinating. So this particular oil on canvas piece is a pretty good size. It's about 5 feet by 4 feet. And it is currently out on view in the British Gallery on the 3rd floor. It is placed on the wall above 2 chairs with 2 columns and busts on either column, just as you might see it as it would have been viewed, in a wealthy household. Now, a portrait is forever. Having portraits made allowed wealthy and distinguished members of the British society to commemorate themselves and their families. Many hope to leave a permanent record of their position and lineage. Patrons who paid large fees for their portraits wished to be shown in pleasing, self-affirming ways. Often, they had input with the artist as to how they wanted to be represented. Here, we're noticing 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and the boys looking directly at us, while the girls might be in a conversation on their own. On the right, we see probably the family dog on a chair. Their clothes tell us that they might be from a wealthy family. And their poses are more relaxed. They're not sitting up straight, they're not stiff and formal. So who are they? Well, we can find this out due to its alternative title, Winchcombe Henry Eyre Hartley and his sisters, Charlotte and Mary. So a family portrait, right? End of the story? Or is it? On the gallery label, there is an X-ray photograph which reveals a now hidden image of a woman seated beside the children. Who was she? Why was she painted over? Scholars speculate that she was the children's mother, but died before the painting was finished. Performing tasks like taking X-ray images and shining light through the painting help us better understand and acquire more scholarship about a piece. But I'm going to say more on this later. George Romney was an English portrait painter, and it is said that he was most fashionable artist of the day. And his work has been characterized by great refinement, elegance of design, and beauty of color. His attention to the surface qualities of skin and the hair and fabric provided a very delicate feeling to the paintings. His subjects gestured were rendered with great sensitivity. The tilt of the head, maybe the set of the mouth. He is generally ranked 3rd in the hierarchy of 18th century society portrait painters after Joshua Reynolds and Thomas Gainsborough, both of whose work can be found in the DIA's collection. Go to the next slide, please. Born in 1734, Romney was the son of a cabinet maker who joined his father's business after leaving school at about the age of 10 or 11. By 28 years old, he established himself as a London painter of historical subjects and portraits. In 1773, he made the trip to Italy as it became an indispensable part of an artist's education. After 3 years of studying antiques and old masters throughout Italy, he returned to England. By the end of 1776, George Romney had become a staggering success. And what's fascinating is he kept sitter books, right? Detailing the information about the sitter and the session. He recorded some 1,500 sitters, many of whom commissioned more than one painting. The number of sittings per day ranged from 3 to 4, and maybe all the way up to 7 on his at the height of his career. And it could be due to his lower prices than those of Reynolds or Gainsborough, which increased his popularity. For our piece, Mrs. Hartley gave a total of 18 appointments that were recorded, the son 4, and the daughters for a total of 17. That's a lot of sittings. Now, we mentioned earlier that the X-ray showed us that a figure was missing. You know, it's not known when the decision was made to remove Mrs. Hartley, but it made the alteration considerable. See, what had to happen was the elder girl needed her proper left arm, a change to her dress, while the younger girl needed her head to be altered. And there was also a final creation of the still life on the right-hand side with the dog. The boy remained pretty much as he was originally painted. Now, it's thought to have been the artist's choice to remove her, right? He found it increasingly difficult to work on the painting, and he was not receiving timely payments. See, he would have gotten paid for those 39 sittings, and he wasn't being paid. So they must have been unusually fussy and demanding as a family. And painters at the time knew that these portraits advertised their talents and were as invested in how the likenesses looked as did the sitters. And the clients displayed these portraits in elegant rooms of townhouses and country estates for their friends and relatives to admire. And the last known fun fact about this artist is that he is kinsman to Michigan's ex-governor George W. Romney and politician Mitt Romney. And the DIA owns 5 of his pieces of artwork. Were there any questions, Christine?
Not at this time, Dave. That's so interesting, though. Did the Hartleys then accept the painting?
Yes, they did. It did go through the family. I believe the son got the painting, according to the article I read. Yeah.
So their family dog replaced the mother on the chair.
Right. Well, yeah, right. I don't know. Was she painted out because they weren't paying, or was she deceased before the painting was finished and may have been too difficult for them? I don't know. It's hard to say.
A lot of questions. Thank you.
Right. You're welcome. Deb?
There are a lot of questions. And I'll tell you what, if I was painted out of a painting with my children, whether I was living or dead, I would be mad. But that's just me. Okay, let's move on to our next piece. This is a painting of an impish little boy with blonde tousled hair. His grin that shows his far from pearly white teeth add to the exuberance that radiates from this piece. So infectious is his merriment that it's almost impossible not to return his laugh. But this is not a portrait of a real person. This painting is called a tronie. A tronie is a type of work that was common in Dutch Golden Age painting that depicts an exaggerated characteristic or facial expression of an imaginary figure. Tronies conveyed different meanings and values to their viewers, embodying abstract notions such as old age or youth, piety or wisdom, sadness or joy. These works were so popular in Holland and Flanders that they were produced as independent works for the free market. So you could go to the free market and you could buy a little tronie picture for your home. Now, the next slide is going to show us a picture of a very famous artist. His name is Frans Hals. He was a Dutch Golden Age painter, and he became one of the most extraordinary artists of the 17th century. He was born in 1582, and he lived and worked in the city of Haarlem, located in the northern Netherlands, not too far from Amsterdam. Hals worked for the town council as an art restorer, and from there he began his career in portraiture. Hals painted portraits of people from every stratum of society, from wealthy gentlemen to militia officers to fishwives. He painted individuals for their wedding portraits, and he also painted about 10 very large group portraits of guildsmen, of local civic guards, and for the regions of local hospitals. And I say local because he never traveled outside of Haarlem to paint a portrait. He was so popular that the artists insisted that they come to him. This popularity was due to his unique ability to capture the character of his sitters with a rare intuition through his mastery of color, shadow, and broad brush strokes. Using these techniques, Hals introduced a new approach to portraiture in the Netherlands, and his work was recognized and admired by both his contemporaries and by his patrons. Now, the next slide will show us something that he did paint. Hals was one of the first artists to capture the spontaneous expression of joy in the face of a child. Laughing figures are unusual and they're difficult to paint. Laughter is one of the most difficult expressions to capture. During the mid-1620s, Hals painted several images of laughing boys and girls. Among them is this painting called Laughing Boy. And this is located in The Hague in the Merit Suisse Museum. But as we see, our copy, the next slide, shows a the painting of laughing children by Hals was very popular, as evidenced by substantial numbers of copies that were made of them. So scholars believe that our painting on the left from the DIA is one such copy. Despite our painting's visual appearance, The most powerful arguments against the attribution to the work of Franz Hals are the weaknesses in the definition of the figure, particularly around the eyes, which remain somewhat flat and unanimated for such an expressive expression. Aside from his pupils, Hals had 2 brothers, 5 sons, and a nephew who were all artists. So it seems very probable that our painting on the left was executed by someone in this circle. But even though he enjoyed great artistic success during his lifetime, Hals was almost totally forgotten after his death in 1666. It was not until the rise of the Impressionists in the 19th century that the vigorous and free brush strokes that brought his portraits so vividly to life were once again appreciated. And although Hals did not create our painting, this boy brings us such great delight that we are very happy to have him as part of our collection in the Dutch galleries. Christine, do you have any questions?
We actually don't at this time, Deb, but these are on view right, or one of these is on view right now, isn't it?
Well, I don't know if Laughing Boy is on view, but I'll tell you 2 other of his portraits are on view in the very first room of the Dutch Golden Age galleries. And again, they look very realistic, and he was able to capture almost the interior soul of a person so well that, even though he was kind of put aside after he died, he became very, very famous as an artist and remains so to this day.
And these are hundreds of years old and they still look fresh.
They do. And so cute, delightful. All right. Well, Dave, take us to the modern galleries now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So this piece, done in pastel on paper, is by the famed American artist Mary Cassatt, who is primarily known for her intimate depictions of women, children, and family members. It is currently not on view as works on paper are rotated. You can go to the next slide. However, in the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist gallery, an oil on canvas painting of a similar topic is on view. And both objects belong to a group of pastels, drawings, and paintings done circa 1900 and after, and are based upon children living in the village near the artist's home in France. Cassatt's practice with these child models was to use them again and again so that they became accustomed to her and the demands of posing. So we're going to go focus again next. Thank you. At first glance, we see 3 women and a young child, and they seem to be outside. All of their attention is focused on the young child. The woman on our right has the young child's hands in hers, and it's probably the child's mother. The other 2 women are focused on the child. The colors appear contrasting, but work together to form a most pleasing and harmonious picture. We see 2 classic themes in art here, women and landscape. However, let's take a closer look. We notice a few things about the artwork that seem to have it breaking with tradition. The woman on our left has her back to us, and the woman across from her doesn't have a clear body form. We sort of have to add that in there ourselves, right? We don't see too much of her body. We don't see distinct outlines of the bodies of any of the figures either. And we can see the brushwork or the handiwork of the artist. They look loose and hurried and blurry, yet they seem to activate the surface while keeping that unfinished look to it. Even the background is blurry. And the people seem to be unaware that they're being sketched, right? They're not in formal poses, like sitting for a portrait. We also see that it's most likely everyday people, not the wealthy. And lastly, if you notice, we sort of, as an observer, are invited into the circle and into the scene as a 5th participant to the scene, right? We experience that sort of thing with other artwork in our collection, like with our Caravaggio or our Gentileschi paintings. And those are old masters that Mary Cassatt would have studied. Her first mother and child picture appeared around 1880, and from 1890 on, her work focused primarily on this subject. Cassatt was born in Allegheny City, Pennsylvania, and was the middle child of 5. In 1860, she began 4 years of art training at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. And then in late 1865, early 66, she headed to Europe for advanced study with the financial support of her brother Alexander, who became president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. In Paris, she studied under Gérôme, whose artwork we also have at the DIA, and she painted copies of the old masters in the Louvre. And just like George Romney, she traveled to Italy to study the artists there, as well as visiting artist colonies outside of Paris. She left during the Franco-Prussian War and then returned to Paris for good in 1875. When she first started showing her artwork in Paris, she used the name Mary Stevenson and exhibited her work in the Paris Salon in several years, 1868, 1870, and then from 1872 to 1876. At one of those salons, Edgar Degas took note of her work at the 1874 Salon and invited her to join the Independents, also known as like the Impressionists, in their next exhibition. So in the fourth Independence exhibition in 1879, she sent 11 pictures, and she never again sent a picture to the Salon. She and Degas developed a warm, friendly professional relationship, which included visiting each other's studios, attending art museums, and the opera together. She admired his art, and with his encouragement, her artwork blossomed into its own distinctive style. Supported by family money, Cassatt needed to not accept commissions. She did, however, paint many portraits of her family and their domestic help. In America, her work became known through exhibitions held at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, as well as the Durand-Ruel galleries in New York. She received a commission to paint a major mural, Modern Women, to decorate the Women's Building at the 1893 World's Columbian Exhibition in Chicago. And then in 1915, she was included in a fundraising exhibition held at M. Knoedler in New York in support of the suffragette movement. In 1894, she bought the Chateau du Beauframe, about 50 miles from Paris, and eventually spent the remaining years of her life active in art benefits, advising collectors and young students. And the DIA owns 6 pieces by Mary Cassatt. And I love that we have like that Gilded Age photo of Mary Cassatt there too. It's just striking.
Love that hat.
Right, exactly.
Shall we move on, Christine?
Yeah, we're good. We just have we actually just have a new question. There's a comment about how wonderful her work is. And then also they were wondering if you know what year this photo of her was taken.
I don't know what year the photo was taken. My apologies for that. It was sort of a last addition to our talk here.
Well, it looks like she was well into her career.
Mm-hmm.
Not an old woman, but not older woman, but not a younger woman. Kind of in the middle there, huh?
Right. Well, she passed in 1926, so probably the Roaring 20s, 1910s, 1920s.
Yeah, quite a hat.
Yes, quite a hat. So beautiful.
Railroad money there.
There you go.
And maybe some commissions too. So.
Well, thanks, Dave.
Yeah, sure.
And you mentioned Edgar Degas several times, and we're going to talk about him right now. Edgar Degas was born in Paris in 1834 to a wealthy and cultivated family. He started painting seriously early in his childhood, and by the time he was 18, he had turned a room in his home into an artist studio. When he was 21, he was admitted to the École des Beaux-Arts, and he began his rigorous training in the techniques of classical painting. Degas became a history painter. He exhibited in the Paris Salon for the first time in 1865 and every year after that for the next 5 years. But little did he know that one day he would change the course of his career path from a classical painter of history to a painter of everyday contemporary art and contemporary life. In 1864, Degas met Edward Manet. Under Manet's influence, Degas changed his style of art. He shifted away from creating conventional images of people and history and moved toward a more progressive way of depicting his subjects. He abandoned his classical style and his work became less formal, with lighter colors and looser brush strokes. At the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, Degas enlisted in the National Guard. During rifle training, his eyesight was found to be defective, and for the rest of his life, his eye problems were a constant source of worry for him. As time went on, he became disenchanted with the Salon and with their strict exhibition requirements, and so, along with Manet, Degas joined a group of young artists who were organizing an independent exhibition society. This group soon became known as the Impressionists, but Degas rejected this title. He preferred to be called a realist. Although Degas was principally known as a painter, he experimented with a wide range of media. In the late 1880s, he developed a passion for photography. He appreciated how by taking a photo, he could capture people in a moment of time, and he used these photos as a reference for his work. After the 1890s, Degas' eyesight deteriorated further. Perhaps it was due to his visual impairment that later in life, modeling appealed to him so strongly. Apart from one sculpture called The Little 14-Year Dancer, Degas never displayed his figures publicly. Instead, his sculptures remained a private medium, and like his sketches or drawings, were limited to a small range of subjects. This bronze sculpture, called Schoolgirl, measures just 11 inches high. That schoolgirl was probably someone Degas had noticed in the street. But look at the texture of it. It's rough. It's almost unfinished surface. But it gives this piece a sense of tactile liveliness. She holds her bag in her right hand, and her left hand is behind her as she's walking down the street. Her tilted hat and her upturned face lend a jaunty look to her countenance. And notice her half shy, half saucy walk, and her spontaneity that's particularly delightful. Degas' eyesight forced him to stop painting and drawing in 1908. He focused on sculpting until he was nearly blind, and he completely stopped working in 1912. Upon his death in 1917, over 150 wax sculptures were found scattered over three floors in his studios. Their existence became unknown to all but his closest associates. Some were only rough studies, but many were very refined, but nearly all of them reached various stages of deterioration. So, just 1 year later, his heirs decided to authorize a series of bronzes to be made from 72 of those sculptures. Schoolgirl featured in this final inventory, but did not appear until 1955 during an exhibition in New York. During his lifetime, Edgar Degas was recognized as an important artist in Paris, and even though he dismissed the term, he is now considered to be one of the greatest artists of the Impressionist movement. Anybody have any questions, Christine?
Well, we have a comment. Our viewer loves the schoolgirl. And then also, I'm going back for a minute to the Mary Cassatt. The photograph was dated to 1914.
Perfect. Just beautiful.
Thank you, Ray, for that.
Thanks, Ray. And I do want to make one more comment, just for a little fun fact. 2 months ago, well, 3 months ago in May of this year, one of Degas' small sculptures, it was called Little Dancer, but they were one of them, broke the artist's auction when it sold for $41.6 million. So he's beloved. People love his work, and they're willing to pay high prices for it too. Okay, Dave, are you going to show us a contemporary piece by a famous African American artist?
Absolutely, absolutely, and standing on the shoulders of the artists we've already mentioned, this next piece, this oil on pressed wood panel, was created by American artist Huey Lee Smith, and that also captured the world around him. It is currently not on view, but is normally located in the General Motors Center for African American Art section of the museum. So let's take a moment and look at this image. What do you notice? What draws your eye? Well, we see an older boy wearing knickers, holding a large rubber tire, standing in an isolated area. It seems like a decaying street with empty buildings that are run down, with peeling paint, boarded up windows, and plaster falling. And we see long afternoon shadows that are cast despite the gray sky. And the boy seems to be posing with the tire, not playing with it. We also see a composition with strict vertical and horizontal lines, coupled with areas of strong lights and darks. But there's something eerily quiet and isolating about this scene. We don't see other children, adults, or animals. Although it is quite detailed, there is no movement. See, unlike the movement that we saw in the sculpture by Degas, this piece seems to stand still, and we're unsure as to where we are. Huey Lee Smith often focused his paintings on urban scenes with decay and the realities of urban life. He was also known for adding an isolated figure to his scenes. Here it's an older boy. Given the way he's dressed, you could probably place him around mid-century, late 40s, maybe 1950s. And Lee Smith uses earth tone colors and street scenes to depict this isolation and aftermath of the Great Migration, when many Black families moved north for work. His subjects focus on social issues and the social and political and economic realities of African American life in America. Themes of poverty, decaying neighborhoods, and children in isolated scenes repeat in his artistic output. The North provided a new set of problems and disappointments for the families who left the South in pursuit of employment and a new life. He wanted to paint this invisible reality. However, not everything is melancholic or a sad state of affairs. Lee Smith offers some hope with the scene, right? Children can be seen as metaphors for either an uncertain future or symbols of hope for the future. And the lone figure can be interpreted as loneliness or independence and strength. So next slide, please. In 1988, responding to questions from an elementary school art appreciation class in Rosebush, Michigan, Lee discussed Boy with a Tire, noting that, quote, "There are boys and girls all over the country who do not have nice clothes to wear and live in tumble-down neighborhoods. Nevertheless, these unfortunate children find ways to have fun despite ugly surroundings. The young lad in my painting found an old cast-off automobile tire that could be great fun. So the tire became his toy, became his friend." Lee Smith was born in Florida and moved with his family to Cleveland when he was 10. He studied at the Cleveland School of Art, and then at the Art School of Detroit Society of Art and Design, which is now CCS, the College for Creative Studies, right behind the DIA. And he earned his degree from Wayne State University, where he also taught in the art department. He was trained in art, theater, and dance. He was also known as a good draftsman. And I love that we own that image, that self-portrait of Huey Lee Smith in our collection. He eventually relocated to the East Coast to teach in New York City. And then in 1978, he met his third wife, Patricia Thomas Ferry, and they made their home together in New Jersey in 1981. Most importantly, in 1953, he won a top prize from the Detroit Institute of Arts for the painting The Piper. Soon after, the DIA acquired the award-winning piece. After winning the prize, Lee Smith is quoted as saying, "I was no longer called the black artist, Negro artist, colored boy. When I won that prize, all of a sudden, there was no longer a racial designation." Lee Smith died in 1999 at the age of 83 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we own 9 pieces of his work. And this is one of my favorites, and I love touring, both of these pieces, really. I like to tour them.
He's an amazing artist.
Mm-hmm.
And it is interesting because when I said to you, hey, would you like to show us a piece by an African-American artist? He would not probably prefer to be called that at all. He might just say, call me an artist.
Right. Yeah. And that's how I started off with it. It's a fantastic American artist.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Sure.
All right. Our next piece is by a wonderful, one of my favorite artists. He's an American artist, and his name is William Merritt Chase. He was born the son of a shopkeeper in 1849. And when he was 20 years old, he left his home in Indiana to study at the National Academy of Design in New York. But several years later, financial setbacks threatened to interrupt his studies. And then his talent, though, was so impressive, and several businessmen saw it, that they proposed to underwrite his further study abroad. In 1872, Chase went abroad. He went over to Germany to the Academy of Fine Arts in Munich, and he was there for 6 years. He painted in dark colors like dark browns, dark grays. That was a characteristic of their academy. But then he left there and went over to Venice, and that was in order to round out his European training. He took up a lighter palette, and that was that one that was popular in Paris. And he began to experiment with a modified impressionist style, one with lighter colors, looser brush strokes. He then returned to the United States in 1878 as a highly skilled artist, and he represented the new wave of European educated American talent that was so very, very desired and well-known and famous in that area of New York. He settled in New York, and he did several things. First, he took a teaching post at the Art Student League in New York, and he was on that staff there for 38 years. But one thing he did that was very important. He went to Manhattan and opened up a salon there, a studio there. It was called the 10th Street Studio. It was in a large building on the 10th Street in Manhattan, and he rented a very large space, and he filled it with all types of bric-a-brac, furniture, exotic animals, birds, live menagerie. He put everything he could that he brought back from Europe with him and that he could collect, and he put it in that studio. And that studio became a focal point for him. And people looking at him, he was so beautifully dressed. He was such a gentleman. Sorry about that. He was such a gentleman and so beautifully dressed, so impeccable, so from Europe, Europeanly trained, that people flocked to his studio, and wealthy people did too. Became center for the art scene in New York. And from that, he got many, many commissions. Then in 1886, he got married. He married a woman named Alice Gerson, and together they had 8 children. But even though he became very famous for his portraits of wealthy people, he became a very big family man. He became very famous for his portraits of his family. He delighted in painting his wife, Alice, and their children, sometimes in individual portraits and other times in scenes of domestic tranquility in their backyard, at the shore near their summer home on Long Island. And these paintings were among his most highly acclaimed works. Now, for this particular piece that does hang in our American galleries, It's one of my favorite pieces, and it's called My Little Daughter Dorothy. What an engaging, delightful portrait of this charming little girl. As I said earlier, they had 8 children. Dorothy was the third daughter of these children. And here she's just 3 years old in 1891 when he painted her portrait. Take a look at her. She's standing in front of a very large painting, and there is a variety of objects in the room that suggests that she might be standing in his studio. Chase paints Dorothy in a long dress, a hooded cloak, and white gloves, and that implies that she comes from a wealthy family. His brush strokes are short and lively, but they're very delicate, and they evoke the sensitive feeling of a father's love for a sweet, darling daughter. This is truly a touching and deeply personal portrait. This is my favorite portrait at the DIA because it reminds me of my mother. I just wanted to let you all know that. My mom's name was also Dorothy, and old photos of her revealed that as a child, she looked like Dorothy Chase in every way. I love this painting and visit it often. Dorothy Chase died in February 1953 at the age of 61. And her father, a great artist, teacher, husband, William Merritt Chase, died in his New York townhouse in 1916 at the age of 66. So yes, Christy, you remarked the other day that, some of the members of the family died rather young. Do you have any questions?
No, we don't have any questions, but I just think it's amazing how he documented his children as they grew up, because if the viewers want to look, Dorothy Chase is documented at almost every age of her life, and he painted her over and over again. And the paintings are, they're in museums all over, but they're just delightful.
They're delightful. They're wonderful. And this could have been in his Manhattan studio where he painted this particular piece, but he also set up a studio in his home in Long Island. And that's where they played outside and they had picnics, but then they would come in and he'd paint them in his home there. So I'm not sure which location this is, but I just think she's just a charming little girl. So
and there's a question in regard to what's on top of the table. Do we know what's on top of that table?
No, he had so much bric-a-brac that he collected. Could have been almost, and it looks like a silver object of some sort. I'm not sure.
I don't think I've ever examined that before.
When I go to the museum, I'm always looking at her face. But when I go to the museum next week, I'll take a good look at that object. And we'll let you know. Because, by the way, as an aside, I'll let you know next month because Dave and I and Kathleen, we are going to be doing another presentation on children at the DIA. So stay tuned for that. All right, Dave, what's our next wonderful object?
Yeah, thanks, Deb. That's amazing what you're talking about. Like when Chase, you can see the love for his child. And we're going to see here too a loving memoriam to a child here. This piece of artwork was created by American studio glass artist Thurman Statham, whose primary medium is sheet glass. And studio glass, by the way, is the modern use of glass as an artistic medium to produce sculptures or three-dimensional artworks. And the artwork is created in their own studios, not in factories. Statham cuts, paints, assembles the glass. He adds found objects along the way to create these sculptures. Knowing this and looking at his artwork, that's exactly what we're seeing here. When this is on view, it is on a platform, and we're able to walk around the entire piece to get a good look at it. Now, the size of this table is a life size, like a child's table. It's about 34 inches wide and 30 inches deep and about 22 inches high. And it was commissioned by a local family as a memorial to their son, who was killed in an automobile accident at the age of 20. So what are we looking at? Well, we see plate glass, some paint, mixed media, text, balls, some recreational artifacts, a house, and a map. On the table is a painted portrait of the boy David Chodakov, depicted at his bar mitzvah. Statham didn't usually paint portraits, but did so here, as the Chodakovs were frequent patrons of his and developed a personal relationship with them. The boy is pictured at his bar mitzvah, the Jewish coming-of-age ceremony, which occurs at the age of 13, in which boys take on the adult responsibility of the religion. He's wearing a prayer shawl, or talit, around his neck, and he's holding a Torah scroll from which he will read at the bar mitzvah. Atop his head is a yarmulke, a head covering, which is an ancient Jewish form of respect for God. And that table is divided into 4 sections. So the section behind the boy is the broken glass, and that's symbolizing the automobile accident. And the section to the right of the boy, we see some blown and shaped glass objects and some random pieces of glass and a letter. And then the last section has a small glass house painted in bright yellow and green sitting atop the table. While this table has very specific meaning, it does leave room for interpretation. Statham prefers not to state the source of his ideas or what he's thinking. He thinks this could mislead the viewers. He believes that art is intuitive and an intuitive visual language. Born in 1953 in Winter Haven, Florida, he was one of the first students to attend the Pilchuck Glass School in Stanwood, Washington, when it opened in 1971. And then he studied sculpture at the Rhode Island School of Design. And in 1978, he received his master's degree from Pratt Institute of Art and Design. And like I said, he's considered the leading figure in the American contemporary studio glass movement, as one of the few African-American artists active in the genre today. When working with sheet glass, like I mentioned before, he cuts it, shapes it, and assembles it into basic forms like chairs, ladders, or houses and tables. And the plate glass is treated as a transparent canvas, and it's a surface for him to do decorative embellishment. Sometimes he adds found objects in the blown glass pieces. You can think of his artwork as a 3-dimensional painting, and such is the case for our table. He's also known for creating large installations and public commissions. He has an irreverence for glass as a precious and pure medium. For him, his works evoke multi-level metaphors: glass sculptures, glass as waste or garbage, glass as found object, and glass as a visual pun. And he's interested in the transparency of glass, the ability to see through it. We can see the walls, the ceiling, the floor, well, depending on where you're sitting to see the ceiling. You know, those things which are usually hidden from us, like when we sit at a table made of maybe wood or steel. He is still active today, and you can easily find his website on the internet. And I'll leave you with a quote from Statham. He says, "I believe art can be understood both conceptually and intuitively. I think there is a need for the general public to come to an understanding that to appreciate art and creativity, they must trust his or herself. That extensive education is not a prerequisite for understanding art. Much of what I do is seated in what is more of an intuitive process. A large portion of my work is exploring these processes within people and their environments." And we own 6 pieces of his amazing work. Yeah. Christine, were there any questions on this one?
No, there aren't, but I sure love how you showed his studio along with the piece.
Yeah, it's a really unique opportunity. We want to get a photo of the artist, and I love that we chose this picture of him in the studio, so you can really get a sense of the type of work that he creates.
Mm-hmm. Do you know where he works? Do you know where his studio is? He's not a Detroiter, is he?
No, he's not. I want to say the East Coast.
Oh, okay.
I could be wrong. I did not. I read it, but I didn't remember it.
Well, maybe Ray can look it
He
up.
did train at RISD in Rhode Island, so
Oh, he did?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
Great.
really nice. Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, Deb, take us to our last piece.
Thank you. Yes, we're going to end our presentation as we began it with another ancient object. This one is from Greece. It's approximately 2,400 years old. And here is another one of my favorite objects at the DIA because it tells a very interesting story, and it's a fun story as well. This beautifully decorated clay object is called Panathenaic amphora, and it was made for a particular threefold purpose: to act as a container, to be a part of a valuable prize, and to serve as a memento of a very special event. As we know, gods and goddesses were very important to the Greeks. They inspired respect and piety from believers, and they were a large part of their everyday lives. The ancient Greeks were competitive people who expressed their cultural values through contests. Of all the games held throughout Greece, the Olympic Games were the most famous. The Olympic Games date back to 776 BCE, and they were held in honor to honor the Greek god Zeus. Similar to the Olympic Games, the Panathenaic Games allowed males from all over Athens to compete in order to honor Athena. Athena, who was their patron goddess of war, peace, and heroic endeavors. The winners of these games brought glory not only to Athena, not only to their city, but to themselves as well. This amphora demonstrates the important connection between sports and religion. Now let's take a close-up look at it. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here we see four boys. Take a look at the right lower slide or lower image. We see four young boys or men who are competing in a race. Their arms are spread out, so we know this race was a sprint. On the reverse side, on the left, we see an image of Athena. She's tall, high-waisted, and she's holding a spear and a round shield. She wears a long Greek garment called a peplos and an aegis on her upper body that was a protective cloak, and it was given to her from her father, Zeus. Now, if you notice, Ray, could you please point to the very back side of, yes, if you see the back of her aegis, that cloak, you see it's scaly and it's covered with snakes. Notice the curled snakes extending from the back. The aegis is known as her identity marker. So anytime you see any goddess dressed like that, you know it's Athena. She's standing between two door columns. Along one side of the columns reads the Greek inscription from the games at Athens. Note that these games were not held in isolation, but occurred alongside religious ceremonies that would honor the goddess. So now, here's the story. Imagine we're in a stadium where the race will begin. We see the athletes come into the stadium and their bodies glisten in the sun. That's because they've rubbed olive oil on themselves for an attractive, healthy glow. They run the race, the crowd goes wild, and the winner is declared. Now it's time for the winner to claim his prize. First, he's crowned with the official prize, an olive branch wreath for his head. These wreaths were so important that some athletes were buried in golden versions of them, just like some of these athletes today are buried with their Super Bowl rings. The wreath was so admired by Athenians that they would place a tiny version of it on their door when they announced the birth of a son in hopes for a future victor who would bring honor to their family. Then, in order to commemorate his victory, the winner is awarded this prize amphora. But he does not only receive one of these amphoras, he's actually given 70 of them. And they were not empty. They were filled to the brim with olive oil. Each of these vessels would hold 38 to 40 liters of olive oil that would weigh approximately 80 pounds, and that did not include the weight of the amphora. 70 vessels of olive oil were valued well in excess of most annual incomes. So when the winner won this prize, he became instantly rich. And that's why that amphora has those two handles on the side of the neck so they can lift it up and carry it away. The olive tree was sacred to Athena, and olive oil had many uses. The Greeks used it to light their lamps, to prepare their food, to soothe their tired, sore muscles, and to nourish their skin. And we still do that today. Now, speaking of nourishing your skin, the next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, these athletes coated their skin with olive oil before they began their race. And after they were done, they were full of sweat and oil, and they wanted to get that oil off their skin. So they took blades like this and they scraped the olive oil off of their skin, and they put the olive oil into that small glass container. And guess what they did with that container? They sold it to their fans. Now, Dave, before you start laughing, before you groan, think of this. I'm going to take you to an NFL football game, and we're going to have a really great time. And on the field, who's playing? Tom Brady. And you say, oh, I think Tom Brady is just the greatest. And I say to you, Dave, hey, you know what? I can buy you one of his jerseys. Or I can get you his real jersey, the one he's wearing now, because I happen to know him. I'll have him take it off his back, and I'll have him give it to you. Which one would you like, Dave?
I want that dirty one. I want that one that's the game-winning jersey that he's using. Yep.
It's just the disgusting one.
Absolutely.
You would like that. Just like those people of Greece would like that oil, because they thought maybe they could be imbued with the power of a much admired athlete. So we can see that people don't change throughout the ages. Not at all. So, any questions, Christine?
No, we did have Ray look up where Thurman Stathem's studio is, and it's in Omaha.
Omaha. Oh. Interesting.
Way off. Okay.
That's
Thank you, Ray.
We're in another part of the country. Well, that concludes.
You did get a comment on this whole oil thing, though, and it was, oh my gee, ugh.
Yes, people think, oh, when we have our visitors and I present that, they go, wait a minute, think about it. So that concludes our presentation today. And I want to thank everybody who's here today. My colleague, David, our wonderful past chair, Ray, thanks for the slides. Thank you, Ian. And of course, Christine, as always, our staff advisor and today's moderator, thank you. But I want to tell you something very important. Make sure you schedule yourself for next week, same time, same place, September 15th, because Ray and Cindy Patrick are going to take us on a tour of the highlights of our upcoming great exhibition called Van Gogh in America. That's going to open October 2nd. It's going to run through the 22nd. It's going to be a blockbuster, and tickets are on sale now. So make sure you get them. Also, as Ian mentioned at the top of this talk, we do have an exhibition that's free if you go into the museum, and that is called The Roots of Van Gogh and His Artistic Roots. And there are artists in there who influenced his early work. So till next week, thanks for coming. Be well. We'll see you then. Take care.
Bye-bye.